This is Toby Eunice from A Gypsy's Kiss with your weekly podcast for Monday, January 20th, 2014. Our guest today is Margie Goldsmith, a writer and novelist from New York. Margie, welcome to the podcast. We're very happy you could join us today.
Thank you, Toby.
Tell us your backstory. How did you end up becoming interested in Forrest Fenn and his hidden treasure?
Well, a good friend of mine told me about him and said she thought it would make a great story for me. And when I learned that an 83-year-old had hidden a treasure, notice I say hidden, we'll get to that later, worth $1 million, I thought this is worth investigating. So I tried to call him on the phone, but he prefers either email or in person. So I said, could I come out there? And he said, sure. And I went out, and I was completely disarmed. He might be 83, but he reminds you of John Wayne, except that his hat is funkier. He never takes off his hat. He never changes his clothes. I mean, he has about 200 blue shirts. They're identical. 200 pairs of jeans. They're identical. His belt buckle, which is that comes off, and that's the only thing that's not washed, and his funky hat. So here he was picking me up at the airport, and I fell in love at first sight. And I'm a very, happily taken woman, and he's a very happily married man, but he's just disarming. He's a combination of Will Rogers, Mark Twain, and Indiana Jones. And so we drove. He was taking me out. He's got a pueblo called the San Lazaro Pueblo, which he bought because it was going to be bulldozed down, and he wanted to save this. And this has a lot to do with the treasure in a way, because one of the items in the treasure, if it's found, Forrest wants back. But in any event, we went out to the dig and just watching him walk around, and he did something his father had done to him when he was 9. When he was 9, he found an arrowhead, and I think that's the most valuable possession of his. And I found an arrowhead. Well, Toby, I don't find arrowheads. I find other things, but not arrowheads, and I know he planted it there. And when I asked him if he planted it, he just gave me one of those sly grins and said, of course not. But he's a charming, charming man. So what I wanted was a good story. That was my objective. And what I ended up with was a friendship which I hope lasts for life. He's just such a fascinating person, and it's not just the thrill of the chase. I'm sure that your listeners know about that book because they're all searchers, but he's written a second book. Well, this is his 9th or his 10th book, and it's called Too Far to Walk. And in this book is a map to the treasure. There's no X on it. It's not going to help you find the exact spot. And it also has the poem in it. And I would suggest to all your listeners that they get hold of this book because it's more of Forrest, and it might give you clues as to his thinking, and that might help lead you to the treasure.
What was your objective when you first started your work on Forrest and his treasure?
My objective was to be able to write a story which would get published. That was my initial objective. And then I got so taken by the whole story that I went back a second time to do a second story, and I went back a third time to do a third story, and I went back a fourth time to do a fourth story, and I know there'll be a fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth time.
What do you think about Forrest Fenn and what he's done with The Thrill of the Chase?
I think, what do I think about Forrest Fenn? I kind of have answered that. I think he's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. He's funny, he's charming, he's smart. He never finished school. It doesn't seem to matter. He is disarmingly debonair and just he's a character too. And I think what he's done with The Thrill of the Chase is initially I think he was looking for a way to help people who had cancer, because all of the proceeds from the book, I mean, as you know, he hid this treasure because he had cancer and he thought he was going to die. So he decided he'd walk out into the desert or whatever territories, into the wilderness and bury this treasure, and they'd find his bones and they'd find his autobiography. I don't know if everybody knows it, but do you know what else he did? He cut off a lock of his white hair so that when and if someone does find this treasure, they will be able to, the scientists will be able to do the C14 and DNA tests on his hair to find out what kind of a person was this who would hide. Every time I'd say to him, Forrest, where's the treasure buried? He'd say, who said it was buried? But I don't think it's going to be found for a very long time. I know I'm not answering the question yet, but I will. I think it's important for listeners to know that he says it's easy to find, if you look and follow the clues, but I don't think that he would anticipate it being found so easily if he's leaving his autobiography and leaving a hair in it and leaving things so that they'll know who he was. This does not sound like something. He said if in 100 years from now it's found, and that's my gut feeling, it'll be found in 100 years or 1,000 years. But what do I think he's done with the thrill of the chase? Besides contributing a lot of money to cancer, because he had chemo and he wanted it to be for people who couldn't afford their cancer treatment, so all the proceeds would go to cancer treatment, and I think they still do. But what he's done much more importantly is he's gotten people off the couch and into nature and into the wilderness and into the forests and into the mountains, just out there doing something. He's united families and friends, and he's given people hope, such as Renelle. I know you did a sequence on her. I mean, she said she was living with the hope of being able to search for his treasure. And I think that's a remarkable thing in this day and age of iPads, iPods, iPhones, MP3s, every other technical device that you have which keeps you from relating to people. He's gotten it to a place that you're forced to talk to your family or your partner or your friend and go out and go on a search together and have something which gives you not only a little meaning but some fun in life. And when I say meaning, I'm not talking about the money of the treasure. I'm talking about just the quest.
To you, what is the most intriguing aspect of Forrest and his treasure?
I think to me the most intriguing aspect is the fact that he wants a bracelet back. And this bracelet has a lot of history. He won it. I originally wrote that he won it in a poker game, and he corrected me, and he said, no, that was a pool game. And it was a turquoise bracelet which came from one of the digs that Wetherell did. And he had put it into the treasure, and then he changed his mind, and he said, look, if you find my treasure, I want the bracelet back. And I think that's just kind of a charming story about Forrest that says it all. I mean, he has so many things. He's a collector. He had the most successful art gallery in Santa Fe. What would one bracelet mean? Well, it wasn't about the bracelet itself or the bracelet's value. I think it was the fact that he won it in a pool game. It's a wonderful story, and I think that's what's the most intriguing thing to me.
What new characteristic have you learned about yourself since you started writing about Fenn and the treasure?
I think what I've most learned about myself was that I'm much more curious than I thought I was, and I'm much more willing to go for it. Now, some people are curious because they want to find the treasure's contents, but I wanted to find out more about the man himself. And usually when I finish writing about a subject, I'm done. It's on to the next subject. But I keep coming back to Forrest because he is intriguing. I mean, besides the bracelet being the most intriguing aspect of the treasure hunt, the most intriguing thing about the treasure hunt is Forrest Fenn himself. And I love the fact that I'm like a dog, gnawing on this bone, and I'm not going to give it up. And I am just as tenacious as those treasure seekers out there. They're looking for the treasure, but I'm looking for more and more information about Fenn. I can't get enough of him. It's always something new. It's always something wonderful. He makes me laugh. He makes me smile. And he has a wonderful sense of humor.
So now that you've had some experience with Forrest and the community around the treasure hunt, what would you have done differently when you first started your process?
I don't think I would have done anything differently, but what I should do and want to do is get back out there a few more times. I'm not getting out there enough. I'm only averaging once a year, although in 2013 I did get out there twice, which was excellent.
What would you do with the treasure were you searching for and found it?
First of all, I don't want the money, because I think it's what happens to those lottery winners. Your life just gets complicated, and suddenly you have friends coming out of the woodwork. But I think what I would do if I actually found the treasure, and I have now brought up its worth to $5 million. Forrest said to me, when it gets worth $10 million, I'm going to go look for it myself. So I think I would go around the world and give the money to every charity that I saw in person. I always am hesitant about giving money to charities that I don't know that well, because you don't know how much is being skimmed off the top and paying corporate salaries. But I could see going to South Africa and going back to Papua New Guinea and going to remote places and going to the South and going throughout the United States and just dropping off large bundles of money at schools and to help with education for children who otherwise couldn't afford it, and to help families who are homeless. I mean, I think that it would be wonderful just to be able to not write a check, but go out there and just hand out the bills and see the joy that it brings to people's faces. That's what I think I would do with it.
I've asked all my other interviewees the same two questions that may involve search strategies, and you don't necessarily have to be out in the field doing it to think about these questions. I'm going to ask you anyway. In which state do you believe Forrest hid the treasure, and why?
I don't think it's in New Mexico. I don't think it's in Colorado. I think it's in Wyoming, because that place resonates with Forrest. And I don't think he would hide it in a place that didn't have special meaning to him.
How do you think Forrest will know when the treasure has been discovered?
I think that people who go looking for the treasure are going to be screaming all over the place. They're going to want the publicity. They're going to brag about it. And somebody might want to return that bracelet. So then Forrest will know. And
then finally, what's the best advice you could give to someone who's planning to get into the treasure hunt?
I think the most important thing is that people have to be very concerned about their health and their safety. You don't just grab a shovel and put on your hiking boots and jump into your pickup truck and go out and look. You need to be prepared for the elements. People have gotten lost. People have ended up overnight in national parks simply because they didn't care about where they were going. They just figured they were going to find a treasure. If you're going to go out and look for a treasure, take matches, take warm clothes, be prepared for the elements, take rain gear. It's just as if you were going out for a day hike. You really must be prepared. It's like what you learn in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. Don't take the weather for granted. Don't take directions for granted. Don't depend on a GPS. You could run out of battery. If you're going to look in the water, because he does give clues about the water, somebody almost ran out of air. They went in with scuba diving equipment. They didn't take a buddy, and it was very dangerous. It's cold in waters out there. The mountains are colder. The altitude is higher. You have to be prepared. You can't just say, I'm going off to find the treasure. You have to approach the treasure as you would go on a camping trip or even an all-day hike, and just be prepared for any catastrophe that could happen. And if you're going into the wilderness, please take a flashlight and a first aid kit.
Margie, I haven't done this with anybody else, but Forrest mentions to me that he listens to these podcasts. So is there anything you'd like to say to Forrest before we sign off?
Here's what I want to say to Forrest. Forrest, if by chance somebody happens to discover the treasure, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to come back out and visit you and pick your brain about your life, because you are the most remarkable person I've met, and you are my treasure.
I'm sure our listeners found the conversation interesting and informative. Good luck in your search for the elusive Mr. Fenn.
Thank you.
Well, listeners, that wraps up this episode. Join us next week for another podcast from A Gypsy's Kiss. And remember, for the latest in the search for Mr. Fenn's treasure, visit our blog at agypsieskiss.com. Until next time, this is Toby Eunice for A Gypsy's Kiss, signing off.